So all right, if that works, we'll start. All right, I'd like to call the Water and Sewer Board meeting to order. And Brenda, if I could get a roll call.
Absolutely. Board member Mercier. She said she was going to be late. Board member Wink.
Here.
Oh.
Board member Roth.
I'm here.
Board member Ridley.
Here.
Board member Anderson. Board member Olson. And board member Brisky. Sorry, Ty, we didn't catch that. We still can't hear you. Well, we'll mark it that you're here.
Can you hear me now? Does that work?
Yes.
There we
Okay,
go.
perfect.
I think we missed Habenik.
You missed me.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I missed
Nobody.
the vice chair and chair. Vice Chair Habenik.
Yes, here. Thank you.
And Chair Moore.
Present. All right, thank you. Moving on to the approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting on August 10th. Could I get a motion for approval?
So moved.
And then a second, and then I'll open it for discussion.
I'll second it and tell you I'm here now.
Perfect. Welcome, Mayor. Do we have any comments or corrections with respect to the minutes? All right, hearing none. If I could, all in favor of accepting the minutes as they are, say aye.
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 Any objections? Okay. Moving on, next up is our public forum. Brenda, do we have anyone wishing to address the board tonight?
We do not.
Okay. Very good. Moving on to new business, then I will hand it over to Mr. Simon for the city ditch fiber crossing.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone see the presentation?
Coming in clear.
Excellent.
My end.
Good.
This item before the board is a crossing agreement and temporary easement for new construction for utility crossing across City Ditch. This is a similar item that came before this board in May for a separate location. These are not uncommon in developing our areas of our community. Level 3 communications is requesting permission to install 3 new communication conduits under City Ditch. These will be installed below the pipeline, we've been told, at around 5 feet, so it's well beyond the 18 inches of minimum vertical separation that we require for any crossing to City Ditch. It will be performed via horizontal directional drilling, which is very common. You've probably seen those devices around town to do similar type of installations. Very common, very low risk for any damage to the pipeline. The access and permission to perform this work is temporary. So once the work is complete, there will be no permanent permissions or access to this to these conduits. The contractor will take on any liability for any damage that would result from their work. City staff will be on site to inspect for 2 reasons. One, we want to make sure that they are taking all appropriate measures to protect our pipeline, and the other is if something were to happen, we can immediately react and notify our contract users and make any necessary changes to the ditch. The work will be performed no sooner than October 15th. We actually are turning off City Ditch at the end of October, so it's right in this period of winding down usage of the ditch. The location is in Fox Street. This is just north of Oxford Avenue. There's actually 2 crossings because of the bend in the City Ditch. This is downstream of our diversion to the Allen Water Treatment Plant. So in the event something were to happen, we would still be able to deliver water or raw water supply to the treatment plant. There are 3 downstream contract users. In the unlikely event that there's a disruption that would disrupt service to them, we will notify, and we will typically, and if anything were to happen, we'd be able to restore the pipeline within 24 hours. Any financial impacts resulting from any potential damage to the work would be borne by the contractor, and those are all the terms and conditions that are set forth in the agreements that were attached to the packet. So that concludes my presentation. Sure, I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
Any questions? All right, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but we need a motion to recommend that council approve by ordinance the City Ditch Crossing and License Agreement and Temporary Construction Easement with Level 3 Communications LLC for the installation of the 3 new 1.5-inch communication conduits under City Ditch.
So moved.
All right, can I get a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, any opposed? All right, motion carries. Next up is the 2022 Stormwater rate and fee increase with our Public Works Director. Marie, are you with us? I actually don't see her on my screen, but I assume she's here.
Yep. Hi,
Okay.
everybody.
There we
For
go.
those of you who don't know me, I'm the Director of Public Works. So nice to meet all of you who are new to the board. That what falls under Water and Sewer Board's purview is also to talk about rate and fee increases, not only for water and sewer, but also for the stormwater utility program. So I'm here tonight to address that, and so that we can move forward with the intent being that we would present the rates to City Council for approval at the October 4th meeting, and they would go into effect on January 1st of 2022. Brenda, are you showing the PowerPoint? Where am I? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So we did conduct a rate and fee study in late 2019. And so what the rate and fee study anticipated was that over a series of years between 2020 and 2024, that we would issue debt of approximately 30 million to support our aggressive stormwater capital and maintenance program. So we do have those projects and programs laid out. And in order to fund that debt issuance, we would then need to increase revenue over that time period in a series of manners, or a series over each year in that period between 2020 and 2024. So the intent would be is that the rate study also laid out what those rate increases would need to be in order to finance that debt. Next slide, please. So here's just a list of the proposed projects. So as you can see there, this totals up to just over $37 million in the next 4 years. And we've been fortunate enough, we've hired a new stormwater program manager, Carrie Evenson. She just started yesterday. She's on the call. So she's in that learning phase for the next at least few weeks, if not a couple of months. And she will be the person overseeing a good deal of this program to bring these to fruition. As you may know, we have already started on several of these projects. And so this shows the planned improvements over the next 5-year period. And you can see that goes even beyond 2024 into 2026. But the intent would be is that we're increasing the rates in order to fund this specific list of improvements. Next slide. So according to the rate and fee study, this is in alignment with that. The rate increase would go up to $43.74 per quarter, beginning again on January 1st of next year. And then the commercial rate would be either one of two things, the $43.74 quarterly, or we also calculate commercial based on the amount of square footage of impervious area. So impervious is area that's covered by parking lot or building roof lines, that sort of thing. So non-green space, basically. So we calculate for those specific sites, which is the greater of those, and charge the rates accordingly. And with that, happy to answer any questions. So again, this is in alignment with the rate study that was conducted in 2019 and following that to the letter of what was recommended. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Floor is open.
I can't tell if my hand's up, but I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Couple things. Is this on top of the $15 a month fees that we've just added?
That I believe was for water, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Peter?
Additional approximately $15 more a month on top of that. And then is this temporary? Once you get everything done, is it going to back down or is that permanent?
No, the intent would be is that it is a permanent rate increase. So after, we will have another rate increase that's planned per the rate study for 2024. But then after that, it would basically level out with just minor increases to cover cost of living expenses as materials and services go up. But yes, it would not go down in the future.
And just to add to that, so the $15 a month is the capital investment fee for the water system. And so that was addressing specifically the water system. We also have the rate and fee and financial plan for the sewer system. So we started with the master planning process in 2019 for all three utilities. From that generated, water was $168 million worth of work over the next 15 years. Sewer was $60 million worth of work over the next 15 years. And stormwater was $115 million over the next 15 years. And so the sewer fund, I believe this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Maria, but the stormwater fund generally generated about $800,000 a year under the old rate. And that's not nearly enough to be able to have the revenue to be able to bond to fix these things. And so all three utilities were lagging way behind the metro area averages relative to rates. And even with all these increases, we're still on the low side. So we're fixing all three of them at once.
That's correct. Thank you, Peter.
I've received several of the papers in the mail about the work being done and what you're doing. I didn't notice that this was part of this. Are they going to do a similar thing where they're going to shoot out to people and tell them what's going on and why they're doing this?
Actually, stormwater is part of those mailings. So there have been so Flow It Forward is for all three utilities. It's for the water fund, the sewer fund, and the stormwater fund. And in the updates, there's oftentimes, it's one of the most recent postcards had 3 different categories where it was talking about all 3 funds and what was happening in it. So stormwater is actually integral as part of the Flow It Forward communications. And I think, I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, Maria.
No, I think it's periodic. As Peter said, stormwater is part of Flow It Forward too. I think it just depends on what activity is going on. So we either sometimes there's more information related to sanitary sewer, let's say, and or water, and then stormwater might not be included and vice versa. So sometimes we hit all 3 utilities in a particular communication, sometimes just 1 or 2 of those.
And what we do in terms of trying to level set it against our neighboring communities is we look at water and sewer together, because generally we can put those together because they're generally served by a utility, whereas a stormwater utility shows up in a number of different areas, and that charge shows up differently for different municipalities and different organizations. So I know stormwater did their comparison to neighboring communities as stormwater to stormwater. And then for water and sewer, we did a water and a sewer more in a combined, even though you could compare the water independently and the sewer independently. And then what we haven't done as much as a total bill, because once you start to totalize it, it gets confusing across municipalities, because some stormwater districts are different than what a municipal district is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know Denver sends a separate bill, I believe, for one of them. And it's once a year.
Yeah, I believe it is for stormwater that they send that separate bill, and I believe it's just annually they might do that.
Yeah, they'll split it up in terms of payments, but they send that once a year.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and there's also the hodgepodge of, so take Southgate, for example. Southgate's a large district to our east that goes all the way down to Ridgegate and it's east to I-25. Well, that's actually served from a treatment perspective by the city of Englewood. So city of Englewood actually does the sewer billing annually on behalf of Southgate. However, Southgate residents also get a bill from Southgate for Denver Water that comes through Denver Water. And then the stormwater, if they're in Arapahoe County, is coming from Arapahoe County, sometimes as a monthly bill, sometimes as an annual bill. And so it's really it's three different bills because it's three different entities billing on behalf of the utilities.
Right. Okay. Would you say it's the storm bill is going to be about equivalent to what Denver's is? Because you said it was by the square, the arable square footage.
Yeah. So actually for residential will be and for commercial will be less than what Denver is. So this will put us roughly in the middle of the group of communities that we looked at. So I'm sorry I didn't have a slide in here, but there is a table in the packet memo that went out that shows it relative to some other communities. So we're roughly right in the middle of the pack. As Peter mentioned, we were at the very low end of the spectrum of Front Range communities who have a stormwater utility in 2018. And so we've been slowly building that up to where we're now about the middle of the pack. But cities like Boulder, Denver, I believe Longmont, and a few others are still above us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I am getting a little better at looking for hands. Sorry, I missed that last one, Drevis. Got it up now. If there's no further questions, can I get a motion to recommend the City Council approve the proposed 2022 stormwater rate and fee increases?
So moved.
There's one. Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion?
I did want to say that not only did we get things in the mail, which I agree, Drevis, that there are a lot of different things and people might not have seen the differences, but it was also in the Citizen. It's such a big deal to change these things. I feel badly. I mean, John Moore and several of us have been on the Water and Sewer Board for a very long time, and that we were not keeping up with what we should have makes me feel really badly about my engagement in this commission over the years. But I'm thankful that we have Peter and Maria to work with us to help us write it, and that still we're less than some of our neighbors, particularly to the north.
Any further comments or questions? All right, with that, can all in favor, can I get an aye?
Aye. Yeah.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Next up is an update on the pump station improvements project. So Steve, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone see the presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Doing good.
So this is an information item to the board on the status of the ongoing engineering work related to our pump station improvements. So as a reminder to the board on the need for these improvements, through the course of the master plan process that we conducted last year, we identified that there were some pretty large needs related to aging infrastructure. In addition to that aging infrastructure, we identified some needs with our electrical systems where they're either obsolete and they're difficult to replace parts, or in some cases aren't up to current safety code. And so we need to address those both in terms of safety and also optimizing how we operate our facilities. And then finally, a big need for us is to get these facilities operating where they're supposed to be. As very old facilities, they're operating still in a mode that they were originally designed. Well, conditions have changed. And when you operate, particularly when you operate pumping facilities outside of that intended design point, then you increase rates of degradation of parts, you increase the maintenance requirements, and ultimately you increase the risk of failure. So here are the major steps associated with this phase of work. Again, the additional need was identified as part of a master planning process. I categorize this as phase one, a preliminary engineering phase, where we're going to take that information from the master plan and we're going to dive deeper. And here are the specific scope items that we are looking at as part of this work. First phase was a data reconnaissance, and what is the quality of data that we have on these facilities? And we found out that it's light. We don't have a lot of information in terms of the original design or construction drawings of what's actually out there. Next step was to take a more in-depth condition assessment. Again, master plan was very high level. We got some subject matter experts in the various components of the facility, brought them outside for a day or two and did a more in-depth assessment. We did an interior survey. So as a result of not having good drawing information, we need something to be able to design from. And so we had a contractor come out and actually do an interior survey. That picture that you can see on the screen there is a rendering of that. And so the quality of data that you get out of just a couple hours of work is pretty remarkable with the technology that's out there now. And so we're able to take that survey information and then provide that to our detail designers in the next phase of work. We're developing alternatives for each of the stations. We're looking at our 4 remote pumping stations, so that includes 2 raw and 2 potable. And so we'll again define those needs that we need at each of those facilities and develop an alternative analysis. Another thing we wanted to take a closer look at was the capacity analysis, and particularly as it relates to the Mcclellan pump station. I'll talk about that on our next slide. And then ultimately, at the end of this project, will result in a preliminary design of our highest priority preferred alternatives that can proceed directly into the design phase. So as far as the capacity analysis, this is specific to the Mcclellan pump station, and the purpose of the Mcclellan pump station is to pump water from City Ditch up to Mcclellan Reservoir. Mcclellan Reservoir is a primary raw water source for Centennial Water and Sanitation District, and it's actually a large revenue source for us as well with the water we sell to them. It's also a backup supply for us, so important in both aspects. And so we reached out to Centennial at the kickoff of this project to solicit any feedback on any additional capacity needs that they might be interested as part of this project. They said no, existing capacity would be fine. From a backup storage perspective, we don't have a need for any additional capacity, but what we're going to do is these are really important times to look into the future. And so what future opportunities do we have to maximize the amount of water we can move up into the reservoir, improve our operational flexibility, and potentially expand any extraterritorial water delivery. So there's a couple factors in how much water we can move up to the reservoir. A very important one, and one that's integral to this project, is McClellan Pump Station. So we're taking a closer look at any potential future needs that we can, again, maximize the water that we can put up there. And that requires looking at our water resources and what that allows, how often we're in a free river situation where we have the opportunity to move more water. That again could be a potential water that can be delivered to Centennial or incorporated into our operations. On the alternatives development side, each facility really had a lot of similar aspects to it. And one was the replacement of obsolete equipment. 2 was addressing safety issues. And 3 was improving how we communicate those facilities. Some facilities have no communications, some we can monitor, but we're limited on our controls. And so ideally, we want to be able to operate these facilities remotely. So 2 of the facilities we looked at were really focused on options that really replaced in kind, keeping the building shell, but replacing the equipment in it. A couple of the facilities do have options for additional structures. That's obviously a much larger investment. So we want to take a really close look at that to make sure that the cost benefit really pencils out to make that initial investment or not. So these are all the factors that we'll consider as part of that or are considering as part of the alternatives development. And then we put it into an analysis to determine where our preferred alternatives lies. And so the things we're going to look at, or the steps we're going to take in alternative selection, is coming up with our criteria, which you can see here, weighting that criteria, and then scoring those alternatives to those criteria. And so when we're looking at different alternatives, to what degree does it improve health and safety? To what degree does it improve reliability, operational flexibility, long-term maintenance, which is very important. Oftentimes we can reduce an initial capital investment, but increase our long-term maintenance. So we want to make sure we balance those over the life cycle. And of course, cost is always going to be a large factor in our alternative selection. Like with any project, you always learn things and discover things through the course of the work. So that was no different for this project. One of the really interesting things that came up was, and maybe a kind of a shift in philosophy from what we were initially projecting, is a potential reduced criticality of Union Avenue Pump Station. And we've talked to this board about, as we've taken a closer look at our water rights, the ability to move more water through city ditch. And we've discussed the potential piping project, which would allow us to move more water year round. Well, if we do that and we're taking more water through city ditch, that reduces our reliance on Union Avenue, which historically we've taken almost all of our supply from. As we built up our hydraulic model and learned about how our system is operating, we've identified increased criticality of our booster pump stations. Our booster pump stations basically boost pressure up into zone 3. Well, we have a lot of our big customers and critical customers in zone 3. So we've taken a closer look at that. Those are actually the facilities where we have no remote monitoring. We actually have no means to track how they're operating. So we set them on pressure, but we don't know how often they're operating. So we're actually setting up some temporary flow meters to get a better sense of how they're operating. Remote stations are good opportunities for water quality monitoring. So we'll look at that at our booster pump stations. We'll look at potential opportunities to not use Mcclellan just as backup storage, but maybe it makes sense to get it as more of an operational storage type of usage. Discussed earlier the inefficient pump operations of how we're operating our pumps, far different than what they were originally intended for. And then some opportunities for storage needs in our system, again, as a result of taking getting a model, a fully functioning model, and better understanding how our system is working. As far as schedule goes, we want to have that capacity evaluation on Mcclellan Pump Station wrapped up by the end of the month. We want to complete this additional phase by the end of the year, proceed directly into detailed design for our highest priority preferred alternatives in the first quarter of next year, with an expectation that we could be ready to proceed into construction in 2023. And that concludes my presentation, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions? Oh, I see a hand. Kaylin.
Hi. So I was wondering, the Cornell and the Pennsylvania pump station, it says to restore. So is that the pump that has not been functioning, and is it raw or is it distribution?
That is one of our potable distribution systems, and that, to my knowledge, at least for the last 3 to 4 years, maybe longer, hasn't been in operation. And so, so we've been able to deliver water to our customers at sufficient pressures, but what we want to really look at is potentially restoring that is where is our vulnerabilities in terms of backup? What if our booster pump station goes out? What does that mean in terms of can we get by on the pumps here at the plant, or do we need that extra capacity in the distribution system? Is there something potentially we could retrofit at the Clarkson and Hamden to provide that redundancy? But that's really just addressing a risk we have of that single pump station responsible for that boosting of pressure to some really critical customers of ours.
And did it get out of commission just because it's older equipment, or something major broke on it?
I actually don't know the history of why we stopped using it. Peter or Angela, do you happen to have any more background? My suspicion is we were working fine with Clarkson and Hamden, And rather than swap between the two, maybe we just relied on the one and decided that one was okay, but I'm not for sure on that.
I agree. I am not exactly sure. I think, but what happens when you don't run a pump station for several years is things start to freeze up and seize up. So even if it was just a matter of not operating it because they were operating something else, because we haven't been bumping the motors and things like that over time, it's to get it running again is going to take some work.
Agreed. I have nothing else to add.
It's a good question because it's actually, as Steve and his team were presenting this to me, I didn't realize it was completely shut off, and I asked why it was shut off, and really we can't figure out why, but we also are trying to determine to what degree do we have a single point of system failure. If a pump station goes down, does that mean we lose the ability to serve? And those are the things that we're sorting out as it relates to this pump station versus the other distribution pump station versus the pump station that comes out of the Allen treatment plant. And so on our distribution side, we're trying to figure out how those interrelate. And without a model, which we've never had a model, it came down to basically people's memory of how things were always run. And you know how that works is there's a certain point in time where people just keep running things a particular way and nobody knows why. And so we're trying to understand all that.
Thanks.
Steve, just a quick question. You had mentioned, I forget your term, but more operational issues or uses of Mcclellan. Just could you clarify that what you were getting at?
So how the reservoir is actually plumbed into our system is we can pump up to it and we can gravity feed back down to it. We're very rarely, if ever, I think, and at least in my tenure and maybe in the last couple of years, use it to actually draw water from and feed it down into the city ditch where it can gravity feed into the plant. And so that's where again, as we become more familiar with our water resources portfolio and what sources we have access to, that perhaps that's an opportunity to where we may not be able to take it directly off the ditch or directly out of Chatfield, in lieu of taking it off of the Platte River at Union Avenue, perhaps we could take that out of the reservoir.
Okay, thank you. Travis.
Two things. With the addition of all the apartments and stuff coming into Englewood, has that been a significant pull on our water? I mean, I know good storage, but is that a reason why we would use some of Mcclellan?
Actually, right now our direct flow rights are enough to supply any amount of increase in development that we've projected thus far. And so really the Mcclellan becomes a system resiliency and a system, a drought hardening helps us if we get experience a significant issue with drought. One of the great things about Englewood is we have really senior water rights. And so even with our direct flow rights, as we add additional apartments and additional growth, the vertical growth it doesn't create as much pressure as suburban growth because you don't have the irrigation component.
Right.
And so from a water system perspective, our treatment plant has a capacity rated at 28. We generally run, I think this year we peaked out at 13 or 14. Wow. So from a system capacity perspective, we have a lot of like major system capacity, whether it be water rights, pump stations, plant. It's just that they're getting old and they just need to be, updated in a lot of these circumstances because the investment hasn't been made.
Right. Well, Peter, one other question. I am right across the street from Bellevue Park, and we always joke that we're the end of the line with the water here. But for the last 8 weeks or so, I've had orange water, and I'm not sure why. I mean, we water the lawn and stuff, and usually if there's anything in the system, that pours it out. But I've had orange water, and I'm like, okay, that is just strange.
So the orange water would be likely tied to any amount of iron sediment in the water. So Angela's on this call. So what we could potentially do is find out exactly where you are, and what might need to happen is some localized flushing of the distribution lines in there, because maybe the flushing program in April didn't get them all kicked up and pulled out. And so
Okay.
we can definitely look at more targeted, and this is actually more system optimization wise for the taste, odor, and hardness
Right.
proposal initiative is to really start to look at more targeting flushing so that you're not experiencing 7 or 8 weeks of orange water.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah, we'll look into it and we'll get back to you.
Okay.
A couple more questions. Actually, Steve, can we go ahead and pull out of the screen share while we just have discussion? That's all right.
Absolutely.
All right, Mayor Olson.
All of a sudden, I was thinking about orange water, and I think I forgot what I was going to ask. Come back to me. I have to figure
All
this
right.
out.
I'll move to Ty.
Quick question, as part of this evaluation, was there any consideration of peak shaving alternatives for the city?
There was not. So our historic usage is, well, I should say, yes, there will be if we take into consideration a raw water delivery system that's more heavily reliant on city ditch, because right now we're almost exclusively relying on Union Avenue, and that's pumping pretty much exactly to what our treatment plant is demanding, which is exactly what our system is demanding. So so if we transition from a dependency on Union Avenue to more utilization of city ditch, which we can then bring up to the plant and utilize North Reservoir, that gets us in a mode where we're less pumping to exactly the demand that we need, which is an inefficient way to try to deliver water into the system.
Thanks.
I remember what I was going to ask.
Go ahead.
It's based on what Travis was asking. So first one was, Peter, you mentioned that vertical growth is not as damaging as horizontal suburban type of growth. And it's my understanding that the amount of water that goes into a metro area is often spent on landscaping, like over 50%. Is that true, or is?
Yeah, I think
Urban myth.
Yeah, no, actually, so on a per unit basis, it's less demand on the system to go vertical with your growth because you don't have the irrigation component. The issue with all these communities that are going through a substantial amount of growth is they build their water system, which is generally the domestic indoor use water system for these communities is substantially smaller than the system that they have to build to meet irrigation demands. And irrigation in the summer is oftentimes more than double what the use per the summer is. So for us, for the winter. So for us, our winter usage is around 4. This year we peaked out around 13 or 14. And so it's 3 times as much as what our irrigation or what our indoor usage is. And so that if we change the denominator essentially, which is number of indoor use units, that means that 4 might go up to 5 or might go up to 6. But because there's not the corresponding addition of a big green grass yard, we don't anticipate seeing a huge increase on that peak end, so that 14 or that 15. So from a peaked perspective in our system, from a water system perspective, peak in the summer, we're probably near generally where our peak would be based on you just can't put a lot of grass in anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's really that base level of what we would see during the winter and how that incrementally increases as we add units. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I think one of the misconceptions of growth when it is vertical is that it does consume a lot of water, way beyond what a normal household, a single family home would do, but actually it's way, way, way different. And it's better growth, and those who are doing environmental science studies and so forth suggest vertical growth and better optimization of land that way.
Yeah,
Not doing expansive high rises either, but concentrating it so that there's not as much usage of land.
Yeah, it gets back to that per unit water usage. And on a per unit, if you're in a multifamily situation or if you're in a vertical growth situation, your per unit usage isn't the same as a suburban greenfield development with a whole bunch of grass and landscaping around it.
The second question I have is, I've been on this committee on and off over the years, and one of the comments that was made early on and has been repeated is that we have at least enough water rights to satisfy a growth all the way up to 50 to 55,000 people. I don't know what that was ever based on, single family units or multiple family, but is that even accurate? Is that accurate anymore?
So my initial gut sense would be that it's not out of the realm of reasonable.
Okay.
I would say that the way that our portfolio yields water compared to our demands, our pinch point is generally September, October timeframe. So, it's not a matter of you run out of water through the year. As we've been looking at yields versus demand curves as part of the water rights plan that we're developing, that Steve is working on with Martin and Wood, is we're looking at a bunch of different scenarios. So we're looking at a climate change scenario. What happens if we get a whole bunch of, what if the yield goes substantially down because the snowpacks are a lot less than what they are today 20 years from now. So what does that mean in terms of our yield of our water rights based on the seniority of those water rights? And then how does that impact our current communities? And then how does that impact a potential growth scenario where we go from 35,000 residents to 55,000 because we become more dense and urban and vertical? And so we look at those scenarios in a way that tries to get us a confidence cone of where we think we'll land in terms of being able to serve our community well into the future. Right now, our water rights are strong enough that really, even as we look at that pinch point in October and September and October timeframe, we actually have enough that we can still make it through that period. And we also have other rights that we are in the process of developing and perfecting that can then further help add some resiliency to that.
That's helpful. That's what I've heard consistently over the years. The last thing I have is really a comment, and I guess it's up to the commission whether they want this or not, but there was a great session that we had. John, you might remember this, and Chuck and others Don, who were on even before I was. We had a session with our water lawyers that actually showed us graphic or visuals of where our water came from, where our senior rights were from. And it really helped the commission, I think, know the power and the depth of our resources. It was really pretty phenomenal for a small town like ours. So I don't know if that would be helpful in the future for this commission, especially as things have changed over time. But anyway, I just offered that as, to inform people and make sure that you all know where the water's coming from and what the kind of rights are, the senior rights that we might have.
I think that's something that we can definitely add to a future meeting. I think there is value to it, especially with new people, the new board members. The issue is that we have the rights that are all the way up north of Fraser that we exchange, and so we do have maps that explain all this, and we can work with Martin and Wood, Berg Hill, and Steve and his water rights engineer to kind of walk through that at a high level and give you a sense for how this all works.
I agree. That would be a good one to do or do again. I don't see any further questions, but I'll make sure in case someone about as good as raising their hand as I am that they get to speak. All right. Then Peter, I'll turn over the next two agenda items to you for a couple of updates.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully I'll get the right one. Okay, can you see my screen? Oh. Hold
It's
on.
coming. There it is.
Move that window.
Yeah,
Okay,
we've got it now.
I wanted to provide an update on our backflow and cross-connection control program. And this is on the heels of a notice that you should have all received in the mail that said we violated our backflow and cross-connection ratio for the end of 2020. And this is something that we've known about since late 2020 and have been working with the state on in terms of how to mitigate this issue and then ensure that it doesn't happen again. So I'm going to run through what has happened, what our plan is moving forward, and then open it up for questions at the end. Let me get on the right thing here. Okay, this is what we're going to do. So essentially, the state implemented regulations a while back that that utilities now have the responsibility to ensure that their commercial, industrial, and multifamily customers that have backflow assemblies, like you see in the picture here, get them tested. Because if those fail, what those are designed to do is they're to prevent a backflow into the water system. So if there's a contaminated water from an industrial plant or something, that water doesn't backflow its way through the system and then impact the distribution system. And so this is something that there's a state law on, and then there's ultimately a city ordinance that has been passed. The city had the ability, was able to do a phased implementation over several years to meet that compliance ratio, and that's what we're working on. So what happened? So we have in 2020, we had a compliance ratio of 80% that we had to meet. And so what that means is we had to ensure that 80% of our industrial, commercial, and multifamily customers who have these got them tested. It's their responsibility to get them tested, and then submitted those results to us, and then track that in a way to ensure that 80% of the number that we have were passed. The individual who was heading up that program in our meters division suddenly passed away in November last year, actually while at work. And so it was a really tragic and unfortunate event that occurred in November of last year. And at that point in time, we didn't have systems in place. We had hard copy paper records, and any database that we had was not a clean database. It had lots of duplication. It had lots of errors. It had not been maintained in a way that was something that we could really work from. And so we had about 6 weeks to try and scramble and pick up the pieces where this vulnerability was. And so we did as much as we could to meet to try and piece it back together by the end of the year, and we missed the mark. And so we then spent, let me make sure that, so this is how it all worked from a timeline perspective. So December 31st, we were supposed to achieve 80%, we achieved 60%. We worked with CDPHE. This is something that Angela took a lead on to figure out how to achieve compliance. We sent multiple reminders to customers to try to get to 80% by the time we had to submit our report, which was in May. At that point in time, we were at 77%, so we still didn't achieve 80, but we were close. A couple weeks later, we actually achieved 80%, which then showed the state we were in compliance. The state then took that information and issued us a violation on July 28th. And if you recall, a few days later, we had another issue with the state that was a pretty substantial issue that we had to work through with them. And we had 30 days to provide public notice to our customers that we violated this backflow ratio. Again, this is a paperwork issue. This is not there's a system failure issue. And so we were working with the state, trying to get them to help us in our approach to notifying our customers. We did not get a lot of flexibility from them in terms of ways to notify. And ultimately, we made the notification deadline of August 27th and sent out the mailer that you should have all received that explained the violation. And then what that does is that now brings the issue to a close and we no longer have that violation. I don't want this to happen again. I think this is one of those things that the community doesn't understand the difference between a boil water order and a paperwork violation on the backflow system. If you look at what the media was trying to do, they were trying to link these two as if they were somehow linked. And these are completely independent issues. They're different issues. And so what I expressed some concern to the state about in some of my discussions with the state is helping to continue to maintain confidence in our community that the water system is a strong water system and not necessarily, these paperwork violations, which are because we just don't have updated, we're scrambling to put in place updated systems that track this, are things that are not things that customers should be largely concerned about while they are still important to comply on. So we're working through that right now. I don't want this to happen again. This is a ratcheting up in terms of compliance. So at the end of this year, we are required to have 90% compliance with this. And then by 3 months later, we are required to have 100%, which then brings us into compliance with the program requirements, which is an annual requirement of testing, and that we're maintaining that 100% compliance with that testing. So what that means is right now we're at 60% and we're supposed to be at 90 by the end of the year. So we have 4 months to get this into compliance. And there are a few things that we are going to do. We've already sent out a letter to everyone who hasn't completed their testing yet to let them know that this is required. In that letter, it warns them that if they do not complete this in 45 days, their water is going to get shut off, because that's a way we can achieve compliance. So if we get the testing ratio, we get the testing information and it shows that they're in compliance, that's one way. If we cut them off from the system, then the system is in compliance and we are no longer dealing with a failure on their part and then it translating to the public's perception that it's a failure of the water system. And so we are working over the next several weeks on a significant outreach campaign with those customers that are not in compliance to help them realize the importance of getting into compliance. Our goal is to be at 100% by the end of the year, such that if there are truly some situations that are unique that we're not aware of that need some more time to get fixed, that will be the buffer between 90 and 100%. But if we can get to 100% by the end of the year, I don't want to just kick this down the road for another 3 months. So the reason why the reason why I want to bring this up so frankly with the board is that these are commercial customers. These are industrial customers. These are multifamily customers. So in these situations, it's not like shutting off a single residence. It might be shutting off a restaurant. It might be shutting off a business that does a significant amount of work in the community. Our goal is to have at least 4 points of contact with those entities to ensure that they get into compliance with this, such that we are not shutting them off. However, without that hammer at the end of this process, my concern is that we'll be in the same situation at the end of this year, and that we'll be talking about notifying again with a postcard to all the community about how we violated the backflow and cross connection ratio. So that is our plan moving forward. I wanted to open it up for any questions, concerns, thoughts, ideas. This one's on my radar, and it's you know, I remember early on, Mayor, you asked me what makes me nervous. This is another one of those ones that makes me nervous.
Travis?
I served on the ACE board, and I am quite familiar with contacting businesses. Would you like us to contact some of these that are not in compliance and assist you by talking to them about how important it is?
I think I greatly appreciate that offer. I think what we could potentially do is at the next board meeting, we'll have more of an understanding of maybe the customers that are not in compliance, and maybe that's something that if you're able to provide some outreach as well, I think we'll take the help where we can.
All right. Well,
Our goal is what I don't want. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm glad to do the help. Just let me know.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate it, and we will talk to you next month about it at the board meeting, because that'll give people at least enough time to know that it's coming. What I don't, the flip side of this is, while I don't want to be out of compliance, I also don't want to shut off a 300 unit apartment complex because they don't have their irrigation backflow tested, because there's a whole different. But there's this catch-22 if they're not in compliance with their requirements, that we have to. It's been clearly articulated to the state that they don't have any flexibility on this one.
Okay.
So if any board members are free New Year's Eve and have their own pipe wrench, just make sure Pieter has your name. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll jump to the next update. All right, let's go ahead and move on to that one.
Okay, let me move on to this. Let me pull this up just a second.
I apologize, board. We're obviously running a little late tonight, and we still have an executive session, but hopefully everyone can hang in there. We just have a lot of stuff to cover today.
Okay, let me move this in. Can you see my screen? Did I just move something in the way of it?
No, it looks good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is hold on just one second. I'm almost there. Okay, so this is an update on our suspension of water shutoffs. And so we talked about this last month, or I believe it was last month. And what I wanted to give at that point in time, I didn't have necessarily data as it relates to who's behind, by how much, what the exposure is. And we had talked about easing into this and eventually reinstating shutoffs at the end of the year. I wanted to come back to the board to we have pulled some data on this and see if there's any modifications we want to make to that process, and also talk about the plans that we have, because we do have some people that are substantially behind in their water bill. So as a reminder, we did this as part of COVID relief. We had talked last month about reinstating in January of 2022. Our typical procedure is customers receive a red tag on overdue balances, and then they have 5 days to pay the bill before the service is shut off. So that's been suspended for a year and a half. And for people who don't have a penalty for not paying, all it's doing is the bill is building.
Yeah.
And so here's the numbers. As of August 1st, we have 491 total customers that are behind, with a total balance of $332,000. Now, that is not an alarming balance for us from a cash flow perspective. It is more significant than what we typically have when we are instituting a normal shutoff process, but it's stayed generally around that 300,000, high twos, low threes frame. So it's not like it's not trending up. It flattened out once COVID hit, and it's generally stayed similar. You can see on the residential side, it's 457 at 284, and on the commercial, there's 34 that total 48,000. Some of the key points here is that 56% of the accounts, over half, owe less than 500. So that's someone who might be a couple months behind, and those are probably easier to work with. We have 105 accounts that have balances over 1,000. And then you can see the top 10 accounts make up for over 10% of the total outstanding balance. So our plan right now is to reach out directly to the customers with substantial past due balances, to get them aware that this is coming, and we are going to need to, we want them to have advance notice that this is coming. We want to do this through the utility bill in October, and through November and January. And then here is a starting point of ideas as it relates to a payment plan option. And this is just an idea, and we would probably start with this with a customer. And then if they contact us and say, I owe less than 500, but I can't pay 250 a month for 2 months. Can I do 100 a month for 5 months? We can work with those types of situations. I think our largest concern is those ones that are over 1,000, and some of them are in excess of 2,000, that we're going to have probably somewhat of they're probably going to have more of a challenge in terms of paying that back. However, we can't just keep letting it build. And so one of the things that we wanted to re-engage with the board is, do we want to do some kind of a different phase to reinstating shutoffs, instead of reinstating them entirely, reinstating on the top, on anybody who's over a certain dollar amount, so maybe that 105 accounts that are over 1,000, do we want to reinstate the shutoff procedure earlier than January to help get them on a track of paying that back? Or we can just stick with January. I just really wanted to bring forward some data so that we could have a discussion based on the real numbers. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if I can get to there we go. And so really I'd be looking for some feedback from the board on whether we want to stay the course or make some modifications based on some of the actual numbers.
I'll say something. Peter, I'd love to see you contact them right away and tell them that this is coming. And maybe even say if they could start to pay on it now, then it won't be so bad in January. And see how many people you're able to take down below that 1,000 to 2,000 bill.
I'm gonna ask Sarah. Sarah, if you can jump on here and maybe jump in with any amount of proactive outreach that we've done or have started to do. Is there anything we've done thus far on this?
We haven't yet. We were going to develop a bill insert to go into the October bills that says, yes, this is coming. Please get on a payment plan. We're willing to offer, starting immediately. We'd like to have everybody on a payment plan prior to shutoffs, starting again at the end of January. Or we would then go out and say, hey, we've given you, 5 months here. You've got to get on some kind of plan to catch up your account.
That sounds good.
And I think we would, send reminders. We can add text in the bill directly that says, again, to remind you again, this is starting in January. Please catch up your bill. So we can certainly target those that have the larger balances directly.
I think additionally, from a timing perspective, is we had a vacancy in the billing staff and billing and customer service staff, and we filled that, and our new billing and customer service person started on Monday. So I think we're back up to full force again. So I think it's easier to reincorporate this into the workload and do some more proactive outreach as well.
Kai?
Yeah, are there any hardship programs that can apply to water bills that currently exist out there? Have we put anyone into contact with those, or are they all more on the energy and rent assistance side?
So there is a program that is available through Arapahoe County. That link is available on our website, and we would ensure that information is available on anything we mail out.
Great,
and
thank you.
That's actually how our customer assistance program works right now, is we're linking to monies that are available through Arapahoe County. So this might just be an issue that someone's not paying their water bill and not realizing that there might be resources available through the county that has come through COVID relief funds and things like that, because they just don't understand how to access it. So if we can match people up to those programs as much as we can, as we individually contact them, we'll do that as well, because that just helps everybody.
Good.
Don't see any additional hands at this point. All right, very good.
Okay, thank you.
Here's that. All right, absolutely. Moving on to old business. Just want to see if there's a Boyle advisory follow-up.
Just a couple things on the Boyle advisory. We every customer will see a $3.42 credit on their bill for October, which represents 1,000 gallons of essentially credited water, which anybody who experienced any issue with the Boyle water probably did not go through boiling 1,000 gallons, but we wanted to ensure that we were providing them enough water at no cost to mitigate any potential issue that was going on through the course of those days. And it just became easier to do that for the entire community as opposed to trying to break it by zone, because it just became more work, and the amount of revenue loss wasn't significant.
How about the filter program? When are those disbursements going to happen?
So the filter program, we have about 50 people who have applied for that, and that will happen. They'll get a credit on their bill for any of those that, as we go through and make sure that they met the criteria, we will credit those accounts for that filter. So we've had about 50 people access it.
Linda?
Yeah, I'm Peter and John, if this is off base, I just wanted to ask a little further follow-up on the E. coli thing about Arapahoe County and figuring out how their communication system worked, and whether there's been some follow-up in figuring out how to make sure that works accurately in the future. I have to say that I taught a class today of 20 undergraduate students that are juniors and seniors. Some of them, about half the class, live in the Denver metro area or stayed over the summer. And most of them got the notice, and they lived all over the place. And one of them lived up in, I think, very northern part of Lakewood, and went to the grocery store and saw that there were absolutely no water at all in the store. And they thought, this is so weird. Like, everybody went and got water out of that 250,000 group of people that got the email or the text. And do we have any notice or any follow-up to make sure that that system is going to work for us in the future, so it's not, tenfold of what was supposed to be notified?
Here's what I'll do is we'll follow up on that directly. The last meeting I was in, Arapahoe County said that they were working with their vendor because there should not have been near that amount of bleed over. So what they say is they geofence it, so they draw a polygon around a particular area, and then they say they should typically get bleed over of about 1/10 of a mile. Well, obviously they got 10 miles as opposed to 1/10 of a mile. They said they were working with their vendor to try and figure out what potentially went wrong with that. And beyond that, I have not heard.
Well, I think we need to get a report from them. I really do. That is a huge trust break for an unfortunate black eye for the city, and nobody knows it's Arapahoe County. And I'm so thankful that you're really committed to values that don't throw Arapahoe County under the bus, but that we find a way to make sure that they're following up. And then the second part of that would be the second notice that I still really disagree with not having sent that far and wide, to say you don't need to boil anymore, because with the same group of students, they said they just kept boiling, and they weren't anywhere near Englewood, but they didn't understand, they had landlords who kept telling them to keep boiling when And they looked online and said, I don't think we need to be boiling. But they had landlords telling them, you need to boil, because the landlord didn't want to get sued for anything in their water system. So it's just crazy. So I want to make sure that Arapahoe County has a clear system of communication, both on the front end and on the back end. I think never is it a problem to over communicate. Anybody in communication and PR work knows that.
Yeah, I think that I was in the meeting when we were discussing how to notify of the rescinding of the order, and Arapahoe County insisted that unless it's life safety, they were not going to use their iPause system again. And we pushed, and they said, unless there is an actual issue of life safety, they would not use it. And frankly, because all of us were thinking the same thing. It's like, well, we told everybody to boil the water, let's tell them not to. And so it was frustrating.
I'd love to talk directly to those people. If you can give me their emails, I'd love to call them up. I will be, me, I'll be very kind, but anybody who's in kind of crisis management knows that communication at the back end is so very important for rebuilding trust.
Yep.
Yeah.
The comment I was just going to make is I thought the flyer that went out after the fact was very good. I will say I would have highlighted more that at the end of the day, it was one property, one small isolated issue. I thought that was a little bit buried in the material. It's just the one thing I would have made that relief stand out a little bit more, but the overall notification I thought was really good follow-up touch. Again, consistent with the communication on the back end is also important.
Yeah. So I can absolutely empathize with that point of view, because we pushed on that, and that's more of we didn't want to get sideways with the state, because the state. So here's what I tell people now. We isolated it to a single meter pit, and we found the leak, and that solved the issue. And so I don't think nothing in that is inaccurate. We isolated a meter pit. It was an individual house. It was associated with a sample point. And as soon as we fixed that, the issue went away. And so people can then draw that next conclusion, which is, okay, so then how did we get to where we got to? And that's where there's a difference in terms of I think responsibility that the state believes that they have to comply with the rules, the federal and state rules, and ensure that there is absolute protection of public health, and what we have, which is absolute public protection of public health and compliance with the rules. However, we have, I think how do I put this? We can interpret things more, I think, based on the data, whereas I don't get the sense that there's a flexibility there. And so to your point, yeah, it wasn't overtly said this was one house, because we couldn't unequivocally say that and have the state maintain a support with us on that. And we want that. We want a partnership with them. It's a frustrating position to be in, frankly.
So Peter, and you're saying that's true even for that follow-up piece of communication, the post-mortem piece.
That's
okay.
Right. Yep.
All right. And respect the position you're in.
Yeah.
Travis?
Yeah, just Peter, if they need a license issue, part of the group that was notified was Porter Hospital. And I have a number of clients there, and they went to extreme efforts for about 5 days beyond when that order was rescinded, and didn't know they could change it. They had to have equipment within their office to deal with their customers because they were medical doctors. And I was the one who said, no, you don't need to keep doing that. And I explained why. They wanted to know why that order was not rescinded, and it was life and death because their equipment has to be specially cared for. And I think that's life and death. They actually had to turn customers away and send them home because they could not take care of their equipment properly without the right water and without the right other, extraneous equipment. And so they turned people away. Those people needed to be in to see the doctor. So I do think it's life and death. And I think you need to emphasize that with them, that there were medical offices that were affected by that order.
I will provide that. I will provide that input as well. Just this in discussing this, we could reach out to Arapahoe County and see if we can get a representative to come to the next Water and Sewer Board meeting, if that's something that would please the board. If not, I will reach them directly. If you would like me to do that, I'd be happy to see if we can get that to happen.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a thumbs up on that.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
So the $3.42 doesn't seem like a lot, right? And I think what that does is that illustrates how affordable water is through a public water system. And so if you were to equate that to a 16-ounce bottle of water, which if you walk into, a 7-Eleven or something like that, not that I'm, I don't want to advertise for 7-Eleven, any convenience store, and you bought a 16-ounce bottle of water, that's, maybe a couple bucks or something like that. For $3.42, you get the equivalent volume of water of 8,000 of those bottles. And so that's where I think there's the people, we have to do a better job as a water community to help them see the value of water, because they won't think twice about walking in and grabbing one, a bottle and spending $2 on it. And yet there's a concern that as we raise rates, that it becomes unaffordable. And so I think we as a water community need to do a better job nationally of illustrating the value of water. But I thought that was a nice thing for anybody that wants to help illustrate what $3.42 buys you in equivalency.
Although we want to still be conservative or conserve the water. So I
Absolutely.
don't want to send the other side of that message either, right?
Absolutely.
All right. I think we need
the movie is it called Commodification of Water? The documentary, I don't know if you've ever seen that, really brings that to full view and visuals. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's pretty phenomenal, but the people buying bottled water, is the commodification of water and how expensive it is and how less actually healthy it is than water out of the tap, unless you have E. coli.
Right.
which we didn't have.
No,
we
did not
we
have. One household did, and she was fine, right? So, but anyway.
All right. We better hit our last topic before going into executive session. So is there a staff's choice on South Englewood Sanitation District?
Yes, very quickly. So Sarah was able to reach out to the manager of South Englewood Sanitation District. If you recall, South Englewood Sanitation District is essentially the southern third of the community that's served for sewer system collection. And so the city itself does not serve that community or that part of the community. Full disclosure, I live in this area, so I am one of the people that's affected by this process. So I just like to say that every time. The way they charge is they essentially charge 1.55 times what our treatment rate is that we establish. And so we asked what's the connectivity between a treatment rate charge, which we do a complete analysis to build up that charge based on the treatment costs and needs and things like that, and how that translates to their charge to our community. And Sarah reached out, and the answer was they don't have a methodology. And so whereas we're working with our connector districts and going to great degree to show industry methodology on how we're going to change their connector district multiplier, their response is we look at what our budget is and then we make the budget, we fit the multiplier to the budget. Interestingly enough, if you go to the South Englewood Sanitation District website, it talks about how they serve every community except for Englewood, even though Englewood is one of the biggest service areas. So they list all the areas in Centennial and all these other areas, but it doesn't list Englewood, which is which is kind of interesting. And I think that's partly because what they then do from a system operations perspective is they have a contract back with the city of Englewood. It's a 20-year contract. It was put in place, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And we, I think, are able to charge them for our management of the collection system. I believe it's $55,000 a year, which is incredibly low. So as much as they're charging us, the bulk of the management of the system actually is contracted back to us as a city to do on behalf of them. Essentially, this is something that Sarah and myself and Tamara and City Attorney Niles are working on a strategy, because I'm not sure it's necessarily the best for our customers. I did have a customer who keeps records from way back when, and she provided me a record of, I believe it was 1992. This issue was raised as an issue with the city of Englewood residents, and the belief that maybe they're not getting the value out of South Englewood service and cost. And so this has been going on for 30 years. Our goal is, especially with Sarah on board, is we want to get to the bottom of this and get a strategy together for that southern third of our community. Because every time we raise our utility or our treatment rate, it translates to an additional rate increase to those customers that we cannot figure out the linkage to, and they've flat out said that they don't have a methodology for. So that's the update on that.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions or? All right. At this point, we need to go into executive session, and I'm going to follow the lead of the city attorney here.
Hey, can I interrupt for a second? I gotta jump off to go help my wife a little bit here, so I'm gonna miss this executive session, but just want to let you know.
Thanks, Joe.
I also am leading a meeting at 6:30 for work. And I just didn't, I'm sorry, I didn't expect it to go this long. Is it, can I connect in with?
If I get to the brass tacks in the first 2 minutes, I'll cover the brass tacks and then we'll go into greater detail. How
Okay.
about that?
It's in Teams. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Attorney Niles probably needs to read something, right?
Right.
Yes. As we discussed at the beginning of the meeting, Chairman Moore asked me to read the script to go into the executive session. So I would recommend that the board move into an executive session for a conference with the city's water rights attorneys for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions under CRS section 24-6-4024B. And so at this time, we would request a board member so move. Then it of course requires a second and then a vote.
So I'll make the motion to go in, and if I could get a second.
Second.
Okay. If I could get, let's see, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So now we all shift and follow our Teams link. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we? Yeah. All right. See you over there.
All right, if I can do it.
I'm having the same fears.
Brenda, could you take that screen down? I can't seem to find how to exit the meeting.
Can someone tell me what I need to click on to go to executive session? I don't.
Oh,
Yeah, so Tamara, you should have gotten an email earlier from Brenda today that has the Teams link.
Okay.
it had both the Zoom link and the Teams link in it.
Yeah,
We'll try that.
and I can forward it to you if you need it.
Okay, I have found it.
Okay, great.
Too many emails today.
Understood.
Are we supposed to exit out of Zoom?
Yeah, exit out of Zoom and then go into Teams. So Chuck and Don, are you able to get into that? And Drivis?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to right now. Let me get out of where I am.
So you want to log out of Teams and then log into log out of Zoom.
All right, I'm trying to log out, but it's not letting me. Or log out. No, cancel. Leave. There we go. Okay. And then
Chuck, do you need a hand? It was in the email I sent. There's 2 links. I can't hear you. You're on mute. Sorry, you're still on mute, Chuck. So I believe you might have to get out of Zoom in order to get into Teams. Don, are you having any problems?
Hey, Brenda,
Yes.
can you please close the Zoom meeting and then we'll go ahead and restart it once we get done with the executive session?
Yep.
Thank you.